You know, there is this universally frustrating experience that I think almost everyone listening to this right now has gone through at some point.
Oh, absolutely. I think I know exactly what you're about to say.
Right. It usually happens when you're actively trying to master something new, specifically a new language or, a complex new framework for communicating.
Yeah, that's usually the trigger.
So you're sitting there on your couch, maybe reading this incredibly dense, highly technical academic text, and you're tracking with all of it.
You feel like a genius.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're understanding the nuances, the subtle arguments, all those nested clauses, or, maybe you're watching a foreign film.
Keeping up with the really fast-paced, witty dialogue.
Yeah, the multi-layered stuff. You're reading the subtitles, or maybe you don't even need them for a minute, and you are just feeling invincible.
Like your brain is an absolute sponge.
Right. You're thinking, I've got this, I am fluent, and then the movie ends, or the reading stops.
And reality hits.
Someone turns to you, maybe a friend, a colleague, looks you dead in the eye, and asks a simple, open-ended question about what you just absorbed.
And you open your mouth to speak.
To share all these brilliant, sophisticated thoughts swirling in your mind, and nothing.
Just completely empty.
The mind goes completely blank.
Yeah.
You completely freeze up.
It is the absolute definition of a cognitive deer in the headlights.
Yes.
That vast vocabulary you just felt so connected to, it just vanishes, leaving you grasping at the most basic elementary phrasing.
It's like your brain suddenly just blue screens.
Yeah.
You go from feeling like this sophisticated intellectual to feeling like you can barely string two coherent syllables together.
Which is incredibly demoralizing.
Totally. The demoralizing part is how quickly you start questioning your own competence. You start thinking, did I actually understand any of that material, or was I just faking it the whole time?
Which is such a common reaction.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because what we are going to explore today in this deep dive is that massive, incredibly frustrating chasm between what linguists call receptive skills.
Which is your ability to understand input.
Right, and productive skills.
Yeah.
Which is your ability to actually speak and articulate those ideas.
It's a huge gap.
We're looking at why this specific blanking out or sudden brain fog happens to really highly intelligent people. And the spoiler alert right off the top is that it is absolutely not a lack of intelligence.
No, not at all.
And it is not a lack of stored knowledge either.
Validating that specific frustration is really the most crucial starting point for you, the listener, right out of the gate today.
Because it feels like a personal failure, doesn't it?
It does. The gap between what you can comprehend and what you can produce is just a deeply misunderstood phenomenon. People tend to internalize it as a failure of memory or intellect.
Like, oh, I just have a bad memory for vocabulary.
Right. But this gap is actually a fascinating physiological and cognitive disconnect. Your vast mental lexicon, all those thousands of words, the idioms, the complex grammatical structures you've rigorously studied for years, they are absolutely in there.
You're sitting in the mental filing cabinet.
Exactly. Your brain has successfully encoded and stored them in long-term memory. They are just temporarily trapped behind a very specific neurological barrier.
So it's not a memory issue at all.
No, you are experiencing a structural bottleneck in how the human brain processes and outputs information.
A structural bottleneck. Love that phrasing. It instantly takes the blame off of our individual memories.
It really should.
If the vocabulary is locked inside the brain, sitting perfectly organized, our mission today is to figure out why it can't get out when we need it most.
And to provide the tools to fix it.
Right. More importantly, we want to give you the actionable, scientifically backed methods to break through that bottleneck. To really diagnose this, we have to look at the neurological divide.
Yes, the neurological mechanics are key here.
Because understanding a language and articulating a language are not just two sides of the same coin. They seem to rely on entirely different machinery.
They do. They are fundamentally distinct neurological processes.
Wow.
If we look closely at this distinction between receptive proficiency, which covers listening and reading, and productive proficiency, which is speaking and writing.
We're looking at two different systems.
It's essentially, yes, two completely different modes of cortical operation. Listening is fundamentally a process of pattern recognition and absorption.
So it's a passive thing.
When you're listening to someone speak, your brain acts as a highly sophisticated receiver. It takes in external acoustic signals, decodes them based on contextual clues, tone of voice, body language, and existing memory structures.
So you're gathering clues from everything, not just the words.
Crucially, yes. Listening relies heavily on predictive coding. Your brain doesn't actually process every single phonetic sound.
Wait, really? Doesn't hear every letter?
Not actively, no. It anticipates what the speaker will say next based on the surrounding context.
Right, so when you are listening, you're essentially riding the wave of someone else's cognitive effort.
That's a great way to put it.
The native speaker, or the author of the text, they did the incredibly hard work of building the architectural structure of the sentence, placing the verbs and nouns in the exact right order.
They built the house.
Exactly. And you were just walking through the door they already built and opened for you. If you miss a word, the context of the room still tells you where you are.
But speaking strips away all of that contextual scaffolding.
Because you're the one building the house now.
Yes, it requires the active, simultaneous synthesis of several incredibly complex systems from scratch.
So what are those systems specifically?
Well, to utter even a single spontaneous sentence, your brain has to synthesize phonology, which involves the precise physical sounds of the language.
The actual mouth sounds.
Right. Then syntax, which is the underlying grammatical architecture and the mathematical rules of how words bind together.
Like putting the adjective before or after the noun.
Exactly. And finally, semantics, the actual conceptual meaning you are trying to convey.
That is a lot to juggle at once.
And it has to coordinate this synthesis not over the course of minutes or seconds, but within milliseconds.
Just boom, instantly.
It is a high-speed, bottom-up, and top-down neural firing process that is orders of magnitude more demanding than simply decoding someone else's speech.
Just the sheer computational power required to generate something as mundane as, I'd like a cup of coffee, please, but with oat milk. It's wild when you break it down like that.
It really is a cognitive marvel.
It reminds me of a comparison that makes this neurological divide really concrete.
Oh, the swimming analogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Imagine you decide you want to become a world-class Olympic swimmer.
Okay.
But instead of actually getting into the tool, you spend 3 years studying the physics and the hydrodynamics of swimming from the sidelines.
A very academic approach.
Right. You read every biomechanics textbook. You watch Michael Phelps in slow motion, analyzing the exact optimal angle of his stroke.
You know all the theory.
You understand the precise rhythm of the flutter kick. And you can mathematically calculate how water displacement works to propel a human body forward. Intellectually, you are an absolute master of swimming.
You have perfect receptive knowledge of the sport.
Exactly. But if somebody suddenly pushes you into a turbulent, deep pool, all of that intellectual comprehension, all those physics equations sitting in your prefrontal cortex will not stop you from sinking to the bottom.
Because you haven't built the muscle memory.
You haven't built the physical muscle memory required to move your limbs in that specific environment.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that physical analogy maps onto the neurobiology of speech generation.
Really? It's that direct of a parallel.
It is. Reading a textbook on hydrodynamics is your brain passively decoding semantic information. That happens primarily in areas like Wernicke's area in the cerebral cortex, forming abstract conceptual understanding.
So Wernicke's area is the textbook reading part.
Basically.
Yeah.
But jumping into the water and actually swimming requires the motor cortex, the cerebellum, and the basal ganglia.
Which are totally different parts of the brain.
Yes, these are the subcortical parts of the brain responsible for coordinating precise physical movements, balance, and timing in real time.
So it's literally a different neural pathway.
In language learning, you can have a towering intellectual understanding of a language's syntax. You can ace every written grammar test and know the dictionary definitions of 10,000 words.
Be a straight A student, basically.
Right. But that knowledge is abstract. Speaking requires immediate high-speed neural firing that connects that abstract linguistic knowledge to physical motor action.
Just like the swimming.
Just like swimming, that specific connection must be deliberately and physically trained. The motor pathways do not magically form just because the semantic pathways are robust.
Wow. So for everyone listening to us right now, take a second to honestly audit your own language journey, or really any complex skill you're currently trying to master.
It's a sobering audit to do.
It really is. How much of your time is spent in that passive absorption mode? Watching the foreign language shows with the subtitles on, listening to podcasts while you commute, reading articles.
The comfortable stuff.
Compare that to the exact amount of time you spend actively synthesizing, forcing your brain to generate the sounds, the vocabulary, and the grammatical structures completely from scratch.
The ratio is usually way off.
For most of us, the ratio is comically skewed. We spend 95% of our time on the sidelines studying the physics of the water, and maybe 5% actually splashing around trying not to drown.
And that lopsided ratio is the exact architectural blueprint of the blanking out phenomenon.
Because we've trained the wrong system.
Exactly. Because of how neuroplasticity works, the neural pathways for absorption become a heavily trafficked, highly efficient superhighway.
We're great at listening.
Meanwhile, the neural pathways for active synthesis, the connection between the language centers and the motor cortex, remain an overgrown, neglected dirt path.
A dirt path versus a superhighway. That is such a vivid image.
So when a colleague suddenly asks you a question, your brain attempts to send a complex, nuanced thought down that dirt path.
And it just gets stuck.
The signal degrades, the processing speed plummets, and the entire system gets stuck.
The implication of this is pretty massive.
Yeah.
If speaking the language is like swimming, and it requires actual literal muscle memory, then we aren't just dealing with a mental exercise anymore.
No, we have to talk about the physical body.
We have to look at the actual muscles involved in speech. Because the failure to speak fluidly isn't just a failure of memory, it is a failure of physical athletic conditioning.
It is a profound paradigm shift for adult learners when they realize that language production is an athletic endeavor.
Athletic? I mean, nobody thinks of language learning as sports.
But it is. We are dealing with what linguists and speech pathologists refer to as the articulatory apparatus.
Okay, when you say articulatory apparatus, I assume we aren't just talking about the tongue.
Not just the tongue, no.
Are we talking about the literal reshaping of the entire vocal tract?
We are talking about an incredibly complex, highly coordinated network of physical muscles.
Like what else?
It includes your lips, your jaw, the hard and soft palates, the alveolar ridge just behind your teeth, your tongue, your vocal folds, and all the muscles of your larynx and throat.
That is a lot of hardware.
When you speak your native language, these muscles have had decades of daily, rigorous, highly specific exercise.
Right, they know exactly what to do.
They have formed deeply ingrained motor habits. They know exactly where to place the tongue against the teeth, exactly how much air to push through the larynx, and exactly how to shape the lips to create the precise phonetic inventory of your mother tongue.
So they're completely specialized.
The issue is that every single language requires a completely different set of physical movements and micro-adjustments.
So if I've spent 30 years speaking English, my articulatory apparatus is essentially a highly specialized athlete trained exclusively for the sport of English.
That's a great way to look at it.
If I suddenly try to speak French or Mandarin, I am asking a tennis player to immediately perform an elite gymnastics routine.
That is the exact physiological reality. The adult brain has deeply entrenched motor routines.
And if we don't break them?
If those specific articulatory muscles remain sedentary regarding the new sounds of your target language, if you never physically practice the unique tongue placements or the specific airflow required, your fluency will inevitably stagnate.
It simply does not matter how much vocabulary you have memorized.
It doesn't. You cannot physically produce the sounds fluidly because the muscles themselves are entirely untrained for those specific sequential movements. The muscle memory does not exist.
Which means we need a highly specific workout routine for our mouth and vocal tract. We literally have to send the articulatory apparatus to the gym.
We do.
The primary solution our sources introduced for this athletic training is called the shadowing technique.
Yes, shadowing.
On the surface, shadowing sounds incredibly simple, but the mechanics of why it works seem to go much deeper than just repeating words.
Yes. Right. Shadowing is arguably one of the most effective mechanical exercises ever developed to build this specific articulatory muscle memory.
How does it actually work?
In essence, it is a sophisticated, high-speed mimicry exercise. It requires you to listen to a native speaker's audio and track their speech as closely as humanly possible, trailing behind them with a delay of only a few deciseconds.
So you're right on their heels.
You are speaking almost simultaneously with the audio, matching their pace, their rhythm, and their exact pronunciation.
I hear mimicry, and I immediately think of parroting.
A lot of people do.
If I am just blindly repeating sounds with a split-second delay, like a parrot mimicking a human voice, how is that supposed to help me generate my own spontaneous original thoughts later?
It seems counterintuitive.
It sounds like a neat party trick to develop an accent, but it feels like it just trains you to be a very accurate echo.
That is the most common skepticism regarding shadowing. To understand why it transcends mere parroting, we have to look at the basal ganglia and what shadowing does to cognitive load.
Okay, remind me about the cognitive load part.
Remember our discussion about the massive computational power required to spontaneously speak?
The phonology, syntax, and semantics all at once.
Right. When you try to generate speech in a real conversation, your brain is simultaneously trying to figure out what to say, retrieving the semantic meaning and structuring the syntax and how to say it, the physical phonology and muscle coordination.
And that crashes the system.
That dual burden overwhelms the working memory, which is what causes the system to crash.
Because the brain only has so much processing bandwidth at any given millisecond.
Precisely. What shadowing does is entirely eliminate the cognitive burden of what to say.
Oh, because the audio is giving it to you.
The vocabulary, the grammatical structure, and the underlying meaning are already provided for you by the native speaker's audio track.
That frees up everything else.
It frees up 100% of your brain's processing bandwidth to focus entirely, obsessively, on the physical mechanics of how to say it.
That makes so much sense.
By removing the what, you force the motor cortex and the basal ganglia, which govern habit formation and motor control, to take the steering wheel. You aren't processing dead words on a page.
You are physically matching a complex audio waveform with your own musculature.
Exactly.
You take the high-level semantic thinking completely offline so the physical body can just drill the movement.
Yes.
It is like a musician practicing scales. You aren't writing a new song, you are just teaching your fingers exactly where the frets on the guitar are, so that when you do want to write a song, your fingers move automatically.
And in language, you are mirroring the prosody.
Prosody, that's the rhythm, right?
The natural rhythm, the musicality, and the stress timing of the language. You are mirroring the intonation, the specific rises and falls in pitch that convey emotion, or whether something is a question versus a statement.
The melody of the language.
Yes. You are executing the elision, which is where native speakers naturally drop certain sounds, and the connected speech, where the end of one word bleeds seamlessly into the beginning of the next.
So shadowing bridges that gap.
Shadowing is the mechanical transition from reading robotic, fragmented, isolated words to physically experiencing fluid, native-like delivery in your own vocal tract.
Our sources actually provided a fantastic, highly complex practice sentence to demonstrate this physical transition.
I love this example.
The sentence is, the inherent complexity of linguistic acquisition necessitates a consistent commitment to oral production.
A mouthful.
Right. Now, if I am a beginner or even an intermediate learner who has only ever focused on reading, my articulatory apparatus is going to chop that up into distinct, isolated blocks.
Like a robot.
I am going to read it like the inherent complexity of linguistic acquisition. It requires immense effort, and it sounds like a machine struggling to process data.
Let's break down exactly how a learner would shadow that specific sentence to master the rhythm and train the muscle memory.
Walk me through it.
When a native speaker articulates that sentence, they do not produce isolated dictionary words. They produce a continuous, undulating stream of sound governed by stress and rhythm.
So it's wave-like.
Notice how the phrase inherent complexity operates. The stress is anchored on the second syllable of inherent, and the second syllable of complexity, competitive apathy.
And competitive.
A native speaker will glide over the surrounding unstressed syllables incredibly quickly. In shadowing, you are forced to match that exact glide.
You can't pause.
You physically feel how the Y at the end of complexity links directly and seamlessly into the O of, creating a new phonetic bridge, complexity of.
It essentially becomes one giant compound word, complexity of.
Exactly. Then look at the consonant clusters. Notice how the phrase consistent commitment requires your tongue to rapidly tap the alveolar ridge for the T's, immediately pull back for the C, and manage the nasal M's and N's.
Consistent commitment.
Consistent commitment. It is a highly specific, rapid-fire physical dance that your tongue and jaw must perform.
I'm literally mouthing that right now. Consistent commitment. I can feel the sequence of muscle contractions. It is a workout.
Shadowing forces your articulatory apparatus to execute that exact choreography at full native speed.
It breaks those old habits.
It forces your tongue, lips, and jaw out of their comfortable, decades-old native language habits. Through deliberate, repeated shadowing practice, those complex physical sequences become automatic motor routines stored in the basal ganglia.
So you're building a library of muscle movements.
So 6 months down the line, when you are in a live conversation and you want to express a completely original thought that happens to require those same phonetic combinations, your muscles already possess the choreography.
They don't have to figure out how to move. They just execute.
Precisely.
Okay, so I can practice shadowing all day in my living room. I control the audio, my jaw muscles can get ripped, my basal ganglia is fully optimized. I am an Olympic-level articulator in the safety of my own home.
You're ready to go.
But the second I try to use it with my French coworker in a real meeting, I freeze again.
And there's the catch.
The physical muscle memory, as powerful as it is, clearly isn't enough to override the sheer panic of a live, unpredictable conversation. The physical training feels entirely useless if the central control room suddenly shuts down.
And this brings us face to face with the most formidable, deeply rooted barrier of all in language acquisition.
The psychological wall.
The psychological wall. In applied linguistics, this phenomenon is formally codified as the affective filter.
The affective filter. It sounds incredibly clinical, like a piece of hardware you'd install in a water purification system.
It does sound a bit dry.
But it's actually an invisible emotional wall, isn't it?
It is the invisible, impenetrable wall of anxiety, self-consciousness, fear of social judgment, and vulnerability that completely inhibits your ability to process or produce language.
Just completely shuts it down.
The most vital thing to understand is that the affective filter is not just a metaphor for feeling a little nervous.
It's physical.
It is a literal, observable, cascading neurological event.
What is actually happening in the architecture of the brain when the affective filter gets triggered? Like if I step up to a native speaker and I suddenly realize I don't know if a noun is masculine or feminine, why does my brain just pull the plug on the whole operation?
To understand this, we have to look at evolutionary biology and the HPA axis.
HPA.
The hypothalamus, pituitary, and amygdala.
Okay.
When a learner steps into a conversation and feels a sudden spike of pressure, perhaps they are intensely afraid of making a grammatical mistake and looking foolish, or they're deeply intimidated by how fast the native speaker is talking, the brain perceives this social threat as a literal, physical threat to survival.
Right, like a life or death threat.
Throughout human evolution, social exclusion or appearing incompetent in front of the tribe meant a loss of resources or even death.
That is intense.
So the amygdala, our primal emotional processing center, hits the panic button.
It freaks out.
It triggers the fight or flight response, flooding the nervous system with stress hormones, primarily cortisol and adrenaline.
So on a neurochemical level, my brain is reacting to a Parisian barista asking for my order the exact same way it would react to a saber-toothed tiger stepping out of the bushes.
Biologically, there is very little distinction.
That is hilarious, but also terrifying.
And here is the critical physiological consequence for language learners. When the brain enters that fight or flight state, survival becomes the absolute and only priority.
Everything else goes out the window.
The brain actively and immediately diverts metabolic resources, oxygen and glucose, away from non-essential, highly complex cognitive functions.
And where does complex, high-level language processing happen?
It happens in the prefrontal cortex, the most evolved, energy-hungry part of the brain responsible for executive function, working memory, and organizing thoughts.
So it just starves that part of the brain.
High levels of cortisol literally disrupt the synaptic connections in the prefrontal cortex. Under stress, the CDO of your brain is effectively sedated or shut down.
The very part of the brain that I desperately need to conjugate verbs, recall obscure vocabulary, and structure a coherent sentence is the exact part that gets neurochemically unplugged the second I get anxious.
Exactly. It creates a literal neurological traffic jam.
The words are there, but the bridge is out.
The vocabulary words are still safely stored in your long-term memory networks, but the prefrontal processing center required to retrieve them, sequence them, and send them to the motor cortex has gone completely offline.
You're just stranded.
You are left staring blankly, not because you lack the knowledge, but because the access bridge has been destroyed by a flood of cortisol.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I think every single person can relate to this specific neurochemical block in completely different contexts.
Oh, definitely.
Think about trying to parallel park your car on a tight, really busy city street.
I'm already getting anxious.
Right. You are lining up, and suddenly the car behind you drives right up on your bumper and starts aggressively laying on the horn.
The worst.
Now, you know perfectly well how to parallel park. You've done it 100 times in an empty lot. You understand the spatial physics of it.
You have the motor memory.
But the second that horn blares, the stress spikes. Your amygdala screams threat. Your affective filter slams down, and your brain simply drops all its driving knowledge.
You forget how to drive.
You suddenly forget how to turn the steering wheel. You forget which way the tires are pointing. You are just frozen in a panic sweat. The driving knowledge didn't evaporate from your brain. The access to it was completely blocked by stress.
That is a phenomenal real-world equivalent.
It's the exact same mechanism, isn't it?
The blaring horn is the pressure of the live, spontaneous conversation. And just as you cannot possibly execute a flawless parallel park if someone is relentlessly honking at you, you cannot seamlessly produce fluid language if your affective filter is perpetually activated.
The system just crashes.
The prefrontal cortex simply cannot function under that specific type of duress.
For everyone listening, this is a moment to do a diagnostic check. Identify your own personal honking cars in your learning journey.
What sets you off?
Right. What specifically triggers your affective filter? Is it the fear of judgment from a native-speaking colleague? Is it the sheer sensory overload of being in a loud, crowded group setting?
Or talking on the telephone?
Yes. Telephone calls where you are stripped of all facial expressions and hand gestures. Pinpointing exactly what raises that invisible wall is the absolute first step to dismantling it.
Because if you don't know the trigger, you can't manage the reaction.
Because if we don't actively manage that anxiety, the prefrontal cortex stays shut down, the traffic jam persists, and the words remain trapped.
Managing the anxiety is crucial, but our sources point to an even more profound structural solution.
Okay, a structural solution.
If the heavy cognitive lifting of mental translation is what strains the system, and anxiety exacerbates that strain, leading to the traffic jam, the most durable solution is to build a completely new neurological highway that avoids the translation process entirely.
A new highway.
We must fundamentally rewire how the brain associates language with reality.
Rewiring the brain. That sounds like something out of a sci-fi novel. It implies a massive, exhausting undertaking. How do we even begin to restructure our neural pathways like that?
The foundational strategy for this rewiring is known as internal monologue cultivation.
Right, the internal monologue, the running voice in our head.
Yes, that voice.
But my internal monologue has been speaking English exclusively for over 30 years. The friction of trying to force it to suddenly narrate my morning commute or my grocery shopping in Spanish or Japanese, it feels entirely exhausting just thinking about it.
It is deeply exhausting at first, which is why most learners never attempt it.
It just feels too hard.
For the vast majority of adult language learners, their internal monologue operates exclusively in their mother tongue. When they want to speak the target language, they engage in a grueling multi-step process.
Walk us through that process.
First, they conceptualize the thought in their native language.
To step one.
Second, they search their mental dictionary for the corresponding target language vocabulary. Third, they meticulously apply the new grammatical rules to those words. Fourth, they push it out through the articulatory apparatus.
Which, given what we now know about working memory and cognitive load, is an absurd amount of computational friction.
It's incredibly inefficient.
It requires so many sequential steps that it is a miracle we ever manage to force a sentence out before the conversation moves on.
It is entirely unsustainable for true spontaneous fluency. You will always be one step behind the conversation.
Always playing catch-up.
Internal monologue cultivation means actively, deliberately abandoning that translation process. It means refusing to use your native language as a crutch.
Growing away the crutch.
Instead, you train yourself to begin labeling your reality directly in the target language. You bypass the mother tongue completely, cutting out the middleman.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you are talking about fundamentally altering how we perceive and interact with the world around us. You aren't just learning new sounds for old things. You are mapping new direct connections.
Precisely. In cognitive psychology, this touches on the semantic network model.
The semantic network.
The goal is to forge direct, unmediated neural pathways between an external object, a concept, or an internal emotion, and its target language signifier.
A straight line.
You want the physical object and the new word to be inextricably bound together in your brain, completely bypassing the native language neural network.
Let's ground this with a specific, highly evocative example from our source material, because it paints such a clear picture of this cognitive shift.
The sunset example.
Yes, the scenario of watching a sunset. Imagine you are standing on a beach, looking at this incredible, vibrant, multicolored sunset.
Beautiful.
If you are stuck in the traditional translation loop, you look at the sky, you feel a sense of awe, and your brain instantly and automatically fires up your native word.
Like a reflex.
Right. Let's say your native language is Spanish. Your brain fires up hermoso or eterio. Then you cognitively pause. You mentally cross out that Spanish word. You search your mental filing cabinet for the English equivalent, and then you finally verbalize, wow, that is ethereal.
And by then, the moment is almost gone.
Exactly. That entire mediated process takes time, it takes cognitive effort, and frankly, it pulls you entirely out of the actual emotional experience of the moment.
It is a fundamentally mediated experience. You aren't really present.
You're in your head translating.
To truly cultivate your target language internal monologue, you must rigorously train yourself to experience the cognitive thought in the target language directly at the exact moment of sensory perception.
No delay.
When the light hits your retinas and that specific feeling of awe arises in your chest, the linguistic label that must organically echo in your mind is ethereal. Not as a translation of a Spanish word, but as the raw, immediate primary descriptor of your reality.
It's beautiful in theory, but let's be ruthlessly practical here.
Let's do it.
If your default factory-installed brain setting is your native language, how do you actually force this internal monologue to switch tracks?
It's not easy.
Decades of neural wiring dictate that I should think in my mother tongue. Doesn't it feel incredibly unnatural, contrived, and even a little isolating to start talking to yourself in a foreign language inside your own head?
It feels incredibly unnatural and highly contrived at the beginning. You are literally fighting against decades of deeply ingrained neural efficiency.
The brain doesn't want to do it.
The human brain is inherently lazy. It always seeks the path of least resistance, which will always be your mother tongue.
So how do you force it?
Cultivating this new monologue requires intense, deliberate, and often exhausting practice. But it starts with microscopic shifts.
Microscopic shifts, like what?
When you're walking through your kitchen, you look at a chair and you force your brain to think the target language word for chair, firmly blocking the native word.
Just labeling things.
When you are making your morning coffee, you narrate the physical process in your head exclusively in the target language. I'm pouring the water is hot, the mug is heavy.
It sounds a little juvenile, honestly.
It sounds juvenile, it feels ridiculous, but neurologically, you are laying down the foundational bricks of an entirely new cognitive superhighway.
You're paving the road.
Over months of consistent daily practice, the translation phase simply drops away. The neural pathways become myelinated and efficient. You begin to actually think in the target language.
And that's the breakthrough.
And that is the exact moment true, uninhibited, spontaneous fluency is unlocked.
Okay, so building an entirely new internal monologue and rewiring your semantic networks clearly takes months, if not years, of dedicated daily cultivation.
It's the ultimate long game.
It is. But let's look at the immediate reality of the listener. What if they have a high-stakes professional networking event tomorrow evening?
They need help now.
Right. Or a massive career-defining presentation on Monday morning. They do not have 6 months to organically rewire their neural pathways. How do they survive the immediate term?
That is a highly pragmatic and necessary question.
How do they stop the effective filter from ruining a meeting tomorrow while the long-term internal monologue rewiring is still under construction?
We cannot solely rely on long-term structural changes. We need immediate tactical lifelines to manage cognitive load and navigate the pressure of the present moment.
Tactical lifelines. I like the sound of that.
The source material highlights two incredibly powerful immediate tools for this: lexical chunks and auditory feedback loops.
Let's start with lexical chunks. I think this is one of the most immediately actionable concepts in the entire deep dive.
It's a game changer.
What exactly are they in a linguistic sense, and why are they considered lifelines?
To understand lexical chunks, we have to look at working memory again.
Okay, Miller's Law. Right.
Yes. Cognitive psychology tells us that our working memory can only hold a very limited number of items at once, often cited as Miller's Law, roughly 7 items plus or minus 2.
So if I'm building a sentence from scratch,
if you construct the sentence word by word, every single word and grammar rule takes up one of those precious slots in your working memory, quickly leading to overload.
it just fills up immediately.
Lexical chunks bypass this completely. They are prefabricated multi-word phrases that are memorized and stored in the brain as a single, unified token of meaning, rather than as individual words that need to be painstakingly assembled on the fly.
So it only takes up 1 slot instead of 5.
Exactly. Because they are preassembled and stored as one item, they require almost zero cognitive load to produce. They act as heavy, stable linguistic anchors in a stormy, unpredictable sea of conversation.
Our sources gave us some fantastic, highly specific examples of these chunks.
Let's hear them.
Phrases like, to play devil's advocate, or, that's an insightful observation, however. Or even, could you perhaps elaborate on your previous point?
Very professional phrases.
Now, I read these, and they sound incredibly polished, highly professional, almost academic. But mechanically, how do they actually function in a live, high-pressure conversation when your brain is starting to panic and the affective filter is rising?
They serve a brilliant dual purpose in a high-stakes environment.
What's the first purpose?
First, on a purely social level, they make you sound highly articulate, measured, and intellectually engaged. They project confidence.
So you look good while you're panicking.
Right. But their secret mechanical neurological purpose is far more vital. They buy your brain crucial processing time.
Oh, so while my articulatory apparatus is running on automatic pilot, smoothly delivering the phrase, that's a really insightful observation, however.
Yes.
My prefrontal cortex is secretly in the back room, frantically scrambling to put together the actual substantive point I want to make next.
Precisely. You're buying yourself a few seconds. Let's play out a mock scenario.
Okay, set the scene.
Imagine you are in a tense boardroom meeting. A colleague asks you a highly complex question.
I'm already sweating.
If you lack lexical chunks, you might just stand there in silence for 5 agonizing seconds, desperately trying to construct a grammatically perfect sentence from scratch.
In 5 seconds, feels like an hour in a boardroom.
In those 5 seconds of silence, the social tension in the room skyrockets, your amygdala senses the awkwardness, your affective filter spikes, cortisol floods your brain, and you experience a complete cognitive traffic jam.
You just crash.
But if you immediately deploy a well-practiced lexical chunk like, "That is a fascinating perspective," could you perhaps elaborate slightly on the second part of your premise?
Smooth.
You have smoothly and instantly engaged in the conversation. You have maintained your professional standing, and most importantly, you have handed your prefrontal cortex an extra 5 to 10 seconds of breathing room to calmly organize your actual thoughts.
So you push the work back onto them for a second.
It is a highly strategic defensive deployment of prepackaged language.
It is essentially linguistic sleight of hand. It is like having a trusty Swiss Army knife in your pocket.
That's exactly what it is.
When you need a screwdriver, you don't have to melt the steel and build the tool from scratch. You just pull it out, unfold it, and use it.
Perfect analogy.
Okay, so lexical chunks buy us critical time and lower the affective filter in the moment. But the sources also detailed a second tactical lifeline, something called auditory feedback loops.
Yes, the feedback loops.
And they explicitly framed this for what they called C2 level refinement.
The highest level.
This implies we are moving beyond just surviving a meeting and into the territory of elite mastery. What does this loop actually involve?
This is the strategy for advanced learners who are no longer content with merely being understood, but are actively striving for absolute mastery, the highest, most refined echelons of fluency.
So what do we have to do?
An auditory feedback loop is a clinical, objective self-assessment tool. It requires you to record your own spontaneous discourse, perhaps speaking naturally about a specific topic or summarizing an article for 3 to 5 minutes, and then painstakingly playing the audio back to objectively self-critique your phonological idiosyncrasies and grammatical blind spots.
Okay, I have to groan, and I know everyone listening is groaning with me.
Everyone hates this one.
Listening to your own recorded voice is a universally agonizing experience. It is physically uncomfortable. Why do we hate it so much? And more importantly, is subjecting ourselves to that agony really necessary? Can't we just get feedback from a tutor or a teacher or a language exchange partner?
The profound discomfort you feel is rooted in physics, and it is exactly why the exercise is so mandatory.
Physics? Wait, really?
When you speak normally, you are not just hearing the sound waves traveling through the air into your ears.
Right.
You are simultaneously hearing your vocal cords vibrate and resonate through the dense bones of your own skull and jaw.
Oh, bone conduction.
This bone conduction significantly lowers the frequency of the sound, making your voice sound richer, deeper, and more resonant to you than it actually is to the rest of the world.
So on a literal, acoustic level, we are hallucinating our own voices.
We absolutely are. Our subjective perception of our own speech is deeply physically flawed.
That explains so much.
Furthermore, because your prefrontal cortex is so heavily focused on the semantic meaning of what you are trying to say during spontaneous speech, it becomes functionally deaf to your actual physical pronunciation.
Wait, really?
Yes. You might confidently think you are perfectly articulating the terminal consonants, the crisp, sharp T's and D's at the absolute ends of English words, or that you are hitting the accurate formant frequencies for specific vowels.
Because that's what we intend to say.
But But objectively, because of the cognitive load, your articulatory apparatus is likely taking shortcuts and falling back into your native language phonetic habits.
We are lying to ourselves in real time, and our skull bone resonance is helping us cover up the crime.
Exactly. Recording yourself is the only way to remove that subjective acoustic bias entirely. It brutally forces you to hear what the rest of the world actually hears.
It's a reality check.
When you analyze the recording, you must act as a forensic linguist examining your own delivery. Did you subtly drop the e's on a plural noun because your native language doesn't use plural suffixes?
Right.
Did you stress the wrong syllable, accidentally turning a noun into a verb? Are your vowel sounds too flat?
You catch all the microscopic things.
By identifying these microscopic habitual errors through the cold objectivity of the feedback loop, you can consciously target them in your next shadowing session. It is the absolute cornerstone of refining your physical delivery and erasing fossilized errors.
It is brutal, ego-destroying work, but the logic is unassailable. It is exactly like a professional golfer or a tennis player watching game tape. You cannot possibly fix the mechanics of your swing if you refuse to look at what your arms are actually doing.
You have to watch the tape.
So what does this all mean for us? We have covered an immense amount of scientific and practical ground in this deep dive.
We really have.
We started with the sheer relatable frustration of having brilliant thoughts trapped in our heads. We journeyed through the neurological divide between predictive listening and generative speaking.
The reading versus swimming.
We discussed the physical, athletic workout required for the articulatory apparatus through shadowing. We diagnosed the crippling, cortisol-driven biology of the affective filter.
That invisible wall.
We looked at the profound, long-term rewiring required to cultivate a target language internal monologue, and we mapped out the immediate tactical lifelines of lexical chunks and auditory feedback loops.
It is a vast, comprehensive ecosystem of practice. None of these elements exist in a vacuum.
It's all connected.
But if there is one golden, overarching rule to synthesize from all of this source material, it is a principle of neuroplasticity. True fluency is a marathon of consistency, not a sprint of intensity.
Yes, the sources were emphatic about this distinction. 5 minutes of deliberate, highly focused oral practice daily, whether that is rigorously shadowing a 1-minute native audio clip or consciously narrating your coffee-making process in your internal monologue,
is vastly scientifically superior to a sporadic, exhausting 3-hour cram session on a random Sunday afternoon.
because cramming doesn't build the muscle memory.
The human brain is remarkably plastic, capable of incredible adaptation, but it fundamentally requires consistent, repeated signaling to physically build new neural pathways and solidify motor muscle memory.
It needs the daily reps.
Binge studying provides a massive temporary flood of semantic knowledge to the cerebral cortex, but it does virtually nothing to physically train the articulatory apparatus.
Your jaw muscles don't care about your Sunday cram session.
And it does absolutely nothing to systematically desensitize the amygdala and mitigate the affective filter. Daily, consistent repetition is the only biological mechanism that permanently builds the bridge between what you know and what you can say.
Which brings us to a challenge for you, the listener, right now. As we wrap up this deep dive, do not let this just be another piece of interesting intellectual content that you passively absorbed while driving to work or folding the laundry.
Take action.
Take just one of these specific strategies and implement it into your routine immediately. Start shadowing a 1-minute YouTube video today. Pick 3 highly versatile lexical chunks, write them on a Post-it note, and stick it to your computer monitor.
Or do the hard one.
Or brace yourself, open the voice memo app on your phone, and record yourself speaking spontaneously for 60 seconds. Move your brain from comfortable, receptive understanding into uncomfortable, productive action.
And as you embark on that deliberate practice, I want to leave you with a final, perhaps slightly provocative thought to mull over, touching on the concept of linguistic relativity.
Ooh, leave us with a brain bender.
We talked extensively about building an internal monologue, which requires you to actively label your deepest, most private emotions and your everyday physical experiences directly in a new language, completely bypassing your mother tongue.
Right, the sunset example.
If you successfully do that over a period of years, if your inner voice, the very mechanism you use to process reality, fundamentally shifts,
Yeah.
are you simply learning a new mechanical communication skill? Or by experiencing and categorizing the world through an entirely new neurological and phonetic lens, are you actually developing a parallel version of yourself?
Wow. Does a new language literally construct a new you? That is a profound question to sit with.
It really changes how you see everything.
Think about that the next time you find yourself staring at a sunset, fighting the urge to translate and trying to find the words. Remember, the words are already in there. You just have to do the consistent physical and neurological work to build the bridges that let them out.
You have to build the bridge.
Don't let the turbulent water scare you. Jump into the pool, start moving your arms, manage the panic, and eventually the muscle memory will take over and you will swim. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep building those neural pathways, and keep articulating.